Uama ke ao ka aina I ka pono o Hawaii Uama ke ao ka aina I ka pono
Kanaka Express. I'd like to welcome all of you for joining us tonight because I think we have another great show in store for you, and with our special guest, Dr. Willy Kauai, and he's the director of Native Hawaiian Student Services at UH Manoa, and so we'll be bringing him on in a few minutes. And thank you for joining me, as well as my co-host, Kelly Kina, who is a superb educator at Kamehameha East Hawaii campus. We're going to be talking about what it means to be a Hawaiian Kingdom subject, because this question has come up a lot. People are trying to understand, what is a Hawaiian Kingdom subject? Aren't I a citizen of the Hawaiian Kingdom? And so we're going to try to get all of that clarified. And also there is a question in regards to, who can be a Hawaiian Kingdom subject? Because I've had people from all over the place all of a sudden declare themselves a Hawaiian Kingdom subject. So what I'd like to do is bring on my co-host, Kelly Akina. Kelly, aloha and welcome.
Aloha mai kako. Aloha na hoa makamaka. Welcome once again. It's exciting tonight to kind of get to talk about Hawaiian subjects and Hawaiian nationals, and really looking at it not just from today's lens with our 2020 vision, but actually getting to talk to some people who are experts at this topic, but really understanding how did our people see nationality and I guess like the word Hawaiian, from the standpoint when Hawaii was not occupied. And so hopefully we can get some answers there. We don't have a script. We do have some questions, and we're just excited to talk story and learn some more tonight again. Aloha.
Well, I'm glad to see you on again tonight, Kelly, and it's always good to have you, because I think I know we're fed up with what's taking place, and so now's the time to make a difference, on all of this stuff. And especially with being a kumu at Kamehameha East Hawaii campus, and your students, there must have been a lot of questions from your students as they were learning about this.
Yeah, I think every year there's questions that regarding nationality, and I think a big part of it is that the denationalization is so deep. 3 generations of miseducation, and it doesn't allow our students many of our students don't understand the difference between nationality and ethnicity, because today in Hawaii it's kind of blended, right? People use those words interchangeably, but really thinking at the legal standpoint and understanding that, hey, there's a difference between your nationality and your ethnicity, and there's also a consciousness that goes along with that. And I think that many young people today they have this puka, this missing part of them, that they don't really understand what's going on, and they can't find their identity or their place in Hawaii or in this world. And part of it is because that identity is missing. And I'm hoping that as we share every year with the students more and more, that hole can be filled with this, I don't know, in my mindset, thinking about the high Hawaii is coming into that mindset, and they have a clear picture of who they are and what nation they belong to. And it doesn't mean we want to exclude any of their nationalities. So we definitely go over, because many of them have multiple nationalities, and I can always say in my classes that we're trying to create the United Nations of the Pacific. And in order to do that, we need members of all nations in the Pacific and other in the world, to understand where we stand, and part of that is, if you are an American, perfect, because we need you to vote for our people as well. And if you're a French subject or a French citizen, perfect, same thing, and so at Kamehameha, it's a melting pot of all these different ethnic groups, and we're hoping to teach the students that it's a melting pot of different national groups as well. That's only going to add power to our movement, and just like TMT, it wasn't just a Hawaiian flag flying there, right? It was 20, 30 other countries supporting the same mission. So if we can do the same thing for our kingdom, for the future of our people, then we win. So yeah, definitely. Lots of questions come up.
That's a great segue to introducing our expert on this, Dr. Willy Kauai. Again, he's a director of Native Hawaiian Student Services at UH Manoa, and he has a PhD in political science and law. And so I'd like to bring Dr. Kauai on, and really, it's great to see you, tonight, and to have you on as our guest.
You too. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Kale.
Aloha.
Aloha, Keli'i.
So, again, can you, as simply as possible, explain to people what it means to be a Hawaiian Kingdom subject and versus being a citizen? What's the difference?
As simply as possible.
Yeah.
As simply as possible, and sorry, as simply as possible. The term subject and the term citizen are used interchangeably, but it's also really dependent upon the historical evolution of a particular government. So, for example, because the United States comes out of a republic type of system, that was a term that was used more often, is the term citizen. Because the Hawaiian Kingdom comes from a different kind of evolution, right? A different kind of governmental evolution. The Hawaiian Kingdom was not a republic; it was considered a constitutional monarchy. Prior to that, it was an absolute monarchy. And so, the Hawaiian Kingdom is very similar in its usage of terminology when compared to Great Britain. So in Great Britain, you'll hear the term subject more than you'll hear the term citizen, as it relates to the historical evolution of those terms. But today, in a modern context, those terms are used interchangeably.
Well, there's a lot of confusion, and I remember, applying for jobs and so forth, and on the job application they ask for your ethnicity, and then in the same application they ask for your nationality, and so that has been a huge confusion, on that. So can you also, explain the difference on that?
Yeah. So in the 19th century, during the Hawaiian Kingdom, you didn't have the same kind of factors that were shaping identity formation as the three of us experienced, or people experience today living in occupied Hawaii. You have to realize that when occupation happens in 1898, we get fully injected with this American racial ideology, this American racial thought. You're talking about an American racial ideology that at that point for the last 200 years has been based around notions of white supremacy. In fact, American citizenship is also defined by these major institutions such as slavery, such as the systematic extermination of Native Americans, to create this understanding of what is American citizen. Throughout the 19th century, an American citizen is two things: white and male, right? And so you got to realize that when Hawaii is occupied, we get entrenched with that same kind of ideology, right? And most of our identity markers post-occupation look very similar to the identity markers that are being created in the United States. So ethnicity and race become, the primary indicators of what it means to be Hawaiian. post occupation, right? And that also becomes very hyper visible with the passage of the Hawaiian Homes Act, right? It's one of the first times in which the term Hawaiian is now being used in an American legal sense, using blood quantum to define what a Hawaiian identity is, right? Blood quantum doesn't exist in the 19th century, right? 1920 and 1921 Hawaiian Homestead Commission Act,
Right.
It really starts to, you start to see how race starts to infiltrate into what it means to be a Hawaiian, to the point where, you become locked into this society in which, you could be born and raised in Ulupalakua. Your father and your grandparents, they have all of the stereotypes of what it is to be Hawaiian. And then there's me, right, who is born in that same era, Hawaiian last name, with fair skin, right, who has to qualify my Hawaiianness over and over and over again as a child growing up, right? And that still continues to this day, right? Those kinds of questions. What nationality are you?
Or how much Hawaiian? What's your blood quantum? What percentage Hawaiian you are?
How much Hawaiian are you? Or have become common questions that we hear, and for somebody like me, that was a difficult question to address at times, and it really depended where I was, what my circumstances were, right, and how I responded. But
I think that same thing is still happening today. I don't think that's any different now in Hawaii. When I think about that too, it's really interesting, because I remember doing research and seeing that Kamehameha the Fourth and Kamehameha the Fifth are actively asking our people to intermarry and to become this like melting pot and different things. And you see, like I tell my students all the time, we didn't treat Princess Kaiulani any different or less of a princess because of her ethnicities, because her nationality was still Hawaiian, and so that's the kind of thing, like, wow, that brainwashing, and so, I mean, how can we fix this? I mean, in your opinion, like, what kind of things can we do to start to erase that and return back to our original, national consciousness where, Kanaka and people and humans and rights and equality, not caring about necessarily the color of your skin?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I usually will just say, reverting back to having a better understanding of how Hawaiian society operated pre-occupation, and that pushes us into, realms of research that needs to take place. I agree with you, that there is something unique and special that took place in Hawaiian society in the 19th century that afforded, the political inclusion of all people of color. And I think those so many of those stories are yet to be told, but they still kind of exist in our world today, right? Despite 130 years of occupation, that cosmopolitan, that multi-ethnic, that racially inclusive spirit, that existed in the 19th century, it still somewhat exists today, right? It's one of those things that continued despite a prolonged occupation, right? And it's something that, there's probably no other place in Hawaii, for example, right, where you can have the first, Hawaii being the home of the first African-American president. And I say that with quotation marks and asterisks, but, there were places in the United States that didn't allow Barack Obama's parents to even be together, right? Yet they were afforded this opportunity in Hawaii, right? And so there's this unique kind of way in which that spirit of inclusion continues on today. And you know, and in the work that we do, right, there are, you know, it's never been just an Aboriginal or just, you know, a Native Hawaiian movement per se. There's, you know, there's always been allies that have been involved in the work that's happening, and allies that, you know, that don't necessarily even have any connection to Hawaii, you know, genealogically. You know, that also took place in the 19th century, where you had the formation of allies taking place. And I'm just, you know, you're talking about different ethnic groups don't have a genealogical tie to this place: Chinese, white, Japanese, African American, being included in this society, and, you know, and wanting to participate in the political process in Hawaii.
Given today, and understanding what took place, you know, back at the time the Hawaiian Kingdom was organized and formed, you know, if you had the power to do something to make the change, what would it be?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that? So this is a hypothetical. Huh?
Yeah, this is a hypothetical question.
If you were He-Man, what would you do?
Yeah, if you had, you know,
sorry,
yeah,
young people, He-Man is somebody.
You know, we're going to create a new Marvel superhero, you know, and it's going to be called Dr. Willy Kauai, you know, and the Marvel superhero, you know, that is going to be making some dramatic changes so that we can right the wrong. What would it be today if you had your druthers?
Well, you know, if we're going to venture into that world, you know,
yeah,
hypothetical, and I'll keep it regional, is, you know, I would put a halt to imperialism throughout the whole entire Pacific, right? And that's, you know, and I say that in this hypothetical, but I also say that in the sense that, you know, the Hawaiian Kingdom also played a similar role in that kind of superhero, right? That amidst European imperialism running rampant through the Pacific, right, throughout Oceania,
throughout the world,
you know, throughout the world,
yeah.
But particularly in Oceania, the Hawaiian Kingdom had played a significant role in, use my words correctly here, maybe softening, you know, that impact, trying to prevent that impact of imperialism in the 19th century. Lorenz Gonchar, who I'm sure will be on this show sooner or later, wrote a tremendous book on this topic that looked at the Hawaiian Kingdom as this model for statecraft. One of the things that he mentions in his book, or uses to characterize the Hawaiian Kingdom's role, is he says that, you know, while 1893 was a significant event for Hawaii and Hawaiians, it was also significant for the rest of the Pacific, right? Because the overthrow, and this is his words, he said the overthrow meant the beheading of the Pacific. And nearly every other Pacific Island country or territory is taken over following the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. And so, you know, if we could go back and change those historical events, it would be quite an awesome thing to see, you know, the idea of a Pan-Pacific Confederation, right? A United States of the Pacific, if you will, right? Form,
or United Nations of the Pacific.
United Nations of the Pacific,
yep.
Right? So and that's something that, you know, it still exists today, right? That this, you know, the world that we live in increasingly, right? And the ways in which different colonies and occupied territories are escaping the grips of their oppressors. What's unique or what's important is that those blueprints that happened in the 19th century that Kalakaua had helped to establish, they still exist as a possibility today. So there is hope in that sense.
I'm getting some text from people and making some comments. So, what role did, if any, did Hawaiian homes play in, I guess, in the formation or denationalization or confusion, if any? That's a question, and and so now since 1920, Hawaiians have been told, oh, this is the best thing for you, and everybody moved on to Hawaiian homes. I was born and raised on Hawaiian homes in Waimanalo, and I saw what took place, which wasn't nice, and growing up in Waimanalo. So does Hawaiian homes have any impact on the understanding of subjects and citizens and the confusion?
Well, I mean, you got to think that Hawaiian homes is coming out of a particular territory in which, or a particular time in the territory in which survival is the significant question of every day. The kind of work that Kuhio and Wise and others had played to establish the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act were acts of survival. Their participation in the congressional politics of their occupier is also survival, right? And it's not just Hawaiian homes in that sense, right? That question is not just for Hawaiian homes, but it's probably a question for every single public institution in Hawaii, right? What was the role that the Department of Education played post 1898?
Yeah.
Right. What was the role that the judiciary played post 1898? Right. When you're talking about the 1920s, you're talking about white supremacy as a system completely entrenched and ingrained in Hawaiian society. Right. We just went from becoming or being fully bona fide Hawaiian nationals of an independent country with all the rights and privileges afforded within, to essentially becoming occupied and then decitizen, right, within the span of 10 years.
20
years, right? So
not
even a generation. And really the overthrow, although it happened on January 16, 1893, it also happened in all the administrative bodies of the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? What made the overthrow so quote unquote easy for 13 people to be 13 people with the backing of U.S. forces. What made it so easy is because all the infrastructure, right, for the Hawaiian Kingdom's all the public institutions, the infrastructure were all set up. And so essentially all you're talking about is the replacement of administrators from different sectors and institutions of the country, right? To the point where, now, mostly throughout the territorial government, you had white males that were the leaders of these, who took over these institutions. Once were Hawaiian institutions, now run by predominantly white males during the territorial era. And so the idea of somebody like Kuhio and Wise and others being able to pull off what they did in the 1920s is somewhat of a feat. Especially because if you consider just how oppressive the structure of government was under the territory, right? The judges were appointed by the President of the United States, the Supreme Court judges in the territory.
right?
appointed by the President of the United States.
The governor and all these things.
The governor
right?
appointed by the President of the United States. That leaves very little voice for the people who are living in these islands, right? And so I understand the criticism that one might point and might aim at the Hawaiian Homestead direction, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and where it went. But then there's today as well too, right?
Yeah. So, question for you, along that lines. So, I know everybody in the show, you might not know, but we don't have a treaty. If you're watching our show, there is no congressional approval, 2/3 vote ratification of a treaty between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States ever. It doesn't exist. And so we talk about legality of the Hawaiian Homes Act, because I have ohana on the Hawaiian Homes too. And I've had other people say like, oh, I gotta get my Hawaiian homes. And then the other side, they're like, oh, but we need to be Hawaiian nationals. And it's kind of this catch-22 because you're asking for this American created law institution, not created, but like stamped as an American institution or American law on Hawaiian Kingdom soil to get land. So to me, that seems to be a conflict. Like, I mean, it's like if you're fighting for your Hawaiian homes land and then you're fighting for your nationality as a Hawaiian, you're kind of like, it seems counterintuitive where they're kind of opposing views, and so what do you think about that, like in your mana'o? I mean, how does that role play for today? Because not thinking of Kuhio's time when they're in the survival mode, we're kind of looking back and seeing these legalities and illegalities. How do we choose what side of the fence do we fight for or talk about?
Yeah, and in addition to that, the cat's out of the bag today. That we know historically what all happened. And so now what?
I think that same survival mode continues. To put that question in context, we have to remember that there's more Aboriginal Hawaiians living abroad than there is in Hawaii today, right? And so, although there is that criticism of legality and illegality, Hawaiian Homes, is providing a critical service to people amid an occupation, right? And I'll go back to what I said earlier. It doesn't just, that critique doesn't just stop and start at DHHL. Even myself, right? I work for the state of Hawaii. I am a faculty member at the University of Hawaii. That is a tremendous contradiction that I am forced to live within, but also to survive within as well. Kamehameha Schools is, they're born in the same boat, but also they're born in 1887. It's an institution that's born during a revolution, right? During some times of turmoil in the 19th century. And so, we all don't need to look too deeply into our own, affiliations to find those same kinds of contradictions. Now, is there opportunities that arise, within these various institutions in which we can bring about some change within the narratives? Absolutely, right? Can Hawaiian Homes still provide the services that they do while also, acknowledging, recognizing the problems that come with blood quantum and Hawaiian identity, right? Can they also provide those services while also recognizing and acknowledging 130-year illegal occupation? Right, those to me are the important moves that these institutions can do. Same with Kamehameha Schools. Kamehameha Schools probably hasn't still fully returned to go and visit a lot of those skeletons in their closet, right? They're there, they exist. And so, and the same could be said with the University of Hawaii, right, is that even an institution of higher education, not just legally, not just politically, but like morally, these institutions have an obligation to acknowledge the truth, right? And if they're ducking that, right, if they're ducking the truth telling, if they're ducking, the real suffering, the context of 130-year occupation, then that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, it's I understand the spotlight that DHHL is under, but that same spotlight could be shifted right to Queen's Hospital,
or all the other elite trusts, exactly.
Correct. And it's happening, maybe not in the fashion or the speed that many of us would want it to happen, but I feel like there's pressure sitting at the doorsteps of these institutions to just acknowledge the truth, right?
You mentioned earlier that majority of the Kanaka Maoli population lives outside of Hawaii, and what if anything impact that these people that don't live in Hawaii will have when it comes time for the Hawaiian Kingdom to be restored, and or if, let's say, there's a vote, to restore the Hawaiian Kingdom, and you have majority of the Hawaiians living outside of Hawaii throughout the world. What do we do? What you must. I don't know if you've thought about this, but
maybe we gotta back up and first say, how do they know that they're Hawaiian national? And then we can get to that question. You know what I mean? Because I think, to me too, that's one of the questions. But I also think that, how do people actually know their nationality? As far as, are they Hawaiian or not?
So basically, anybody that can trace their genealogy to someone who is a Hawaiian subject before the occupation happens in 1893 would still legally today carry the nationality of that ancestor.
Okay,
and
that brings up another
nationality.
That brings up another question. Define Hawaiian under Hawaiian Kingdom constitutional law, because that is another confusion today. In terms of for our people today.
So Hawaiian is short for Hawaiian subject, right? And that again was the marker that denoted membership that denoted an individual's membership to the country, right, called the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's an inclusive marker, right, in the 19th century, right? So it was a marker that was given to people who were not Aboriginal. Even the term Native Hawaiian was also used to indicate a person who is a Hawaiian national but was born on the soil, right? Who didn't necessarily naturalize, right? Because those that naturalize, there's I want to say probably about 4,000 people that naturalized in the Hawaiian Kingdom from maybe 3,000 from the 1840s to 1893. And they're coming from different parts of the world, right? When they naturalize, they are given the term or considered a Hawaiian. Right?
And that doesn't. They don't have to have blood. They're just recognized as a Hawaiian subject. And
yeah, so even some of the more popular traders that we know of, right? So Sanford B. Dole and Lauren Thurston, Native Hawaiians, right? Their nationality is Hawaiian. We're never American citizens. So even when we hear these narratives, these narratives trying to characterize the overthrow, we usually hear American businessmen. And that in our psyche, that tells us that, oh yeah, Lauren Thurston was an American. But he wasn't. He was an example of somebody who was
A trader.
a Hawaiian trader. Yeah.
Right.
And he had a number of yeah. But he was never an American citizen, which is an it's an important
piece of the puzzle.
Piece of the puzzle that that usually just goes overlooked, because of because we're so ingrained with American racial ideologies, understandings of American racial formations, that we seem to miss those details.
Well, the confusion, and I pointed this out when I was filling out applications and being asked ethnicity and nationality. For the longest time, because of the blood quantum that was required on Hawaiian homes, for those that had 50% or more blood, it was like, raising the flag. They were so proud to tell people, oh, I get 50% Hawaiian blood, so therefore I'm a Hawaiian. And then those with less than 50%, was considered less than a Hawaiian because they didn't qualify for Hawaiian homelands. And not knowing the difference between their ethnicity in the Hawaiian Kingdom, it didn't make any difference, right? As far as how much blood you had, or if you didn't have any blood, but you were still considered a Hawaiian.
Yeah, the term Hawaiian is just it's the umbrella term, right? It's a Hawaiian under the term Hawaiian national, right? Under that umbrella is in the 19th century is a multi-ethnic society, right? Where you had Chinese that are Hawaiian, Japanese that are Hawaiian, African Americans that are Hawaiian, right?
So in that concept, like you said earlier about you have to look up your genealogy, and in American society, it's becoming more popular now, like looking up your ancestry and that kind of stuff. If you want to show someone legal proof that you are a Hawaiian national, is that what we do? We show them our birth certificates and our genealogical research, or is there some other process that because like Kale said earlier, people just live here, they read on the internet an oath, and now they're saying they're Hawaiian. You know what I mean? But is there a proof that we Kanaka or we actually Hawaiian nationals can show that, hey, look, maybe like here's all my birth certificates or whatever that shows I actually am a Hawaiian national? Is there something like that today that we have?
Yeah, the vital records that we have at let's say the Department of Health, they can provide those those forms of documentation. That's actually another institution that is born in the 19th century, right? And so those records still carry through, from the 19th century until today. But that's doing your genealogy, of course, could potentially unlock more, magic than just your designation as a Hawaiian national. But yeah, there definitely are venues and repositories for that kind of work to be done.
Okay, so there's a question that came up, and born in Hawaii, question mark.
So if you're born during the occupation, you retain the nationality of your parents, right? So that's an international legal principle. So
does that qualify you as a Hawaiian subject?
No. So for example, and this is an extreme example, but Senator Daniel Inouye, 6-term congressional senator, right, born in Hawaii in either 1920s or 1930s during the occupation.
1926.
Right? 1926.
Yeah.
What is his nationality? Under international law, right? international law says during an occupation, anybody born within that territory retains the nationality of their parents. Daniel Inouye, born in Hawaii, 1926, is a Japanese national, right?
And he's a third from the presidency because he was a
and
president
at
of the
one
Senate.
point, and
right?
at one point, yeah, he was the third most powerful person in U.S. politics.
Not an American.
Another extreme example is Barack Obama. 1961 or 1963, Kapiolani Hospital. Me and Dr. Sai did a presentation in the political science department about 10 years ago called Why the Birthers Are Right for All the Wrong Reasons. The birthers are this extreme right-wing American group that suggested that Barack Obama was not qualified to be the president of the United States because of his birth in Kenya, right? That's actually one of the platforms in which soon-to-be President Donald Trump ran his campaign. So me and Keanu we presented this presentation of why the birthers are right for all the wrong reasons, right? The reason why the birthers are right is not because Barack Obama was born in Kenya, but because he was born in an occupied country, right? Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that the U.S. president, that office must be held by a natural-born citizen. Barack Obama is an American citizen by his mother's birth, by virtue of his mother's birth, or by his birth by his mother in Kansas. But he was never considered a natural-born citizen. So all of these, all of these different complex situations come up, but there are principles that help to guide, nationality during the time of an occupation. So for the majority of the Aboriginal population, they retain, and that's why tracing your ancestry back and your genealogy back to 1893 is important, because the Aboriginal population retains the nationality of their parents, right?
It doesn't matter. Let's say your mom and dad, or your dad was in the military, and you were born somewhere else in Wurzburg or Germany or France or some other place. You still get because your parents are from the occupied territory. It still comes from the parent.
Yeah, that's how the status quo of nationality continues during an occupation.
So let's say if your mom was from Kansas and your dad is from Hawaii, then you would be considered a dual nationality.
You'd be considered a dual citizen. Yeah.
Okay. Just for clarification, then, in regards to people that don't have Hawaiian blood, if they had their tutu or in their genealogy shows that their grandparents or great grandparents came to the Hawaiian Kingdom, at the time prior to 1893, and then naturalized as a Hawaiian Kingdom subject, then in 2021, they would be considered a Hawaiian subject, correct?
Yeah. So regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, if you can trace your genealogy to a Hawaiian national before 1893, you carry that same.
So anybody after 1893, we have lots of people running around and declaring themselves Hawaiian Kingdom subjects, and they were born in 1951 in Hawaii with no ties prior to that, then they're not Hawaiian Kingdom subjects. Is that right?
No. So citizenship, right? So nationality, right? So Hawaiian nationality has not. So when the occupation takes place, okay. So prior to the occupation, there were three primary ways in which you could gain Hawaiian nationality. The first being born from the soil, right? So if you're born in the realm, in the territory of the Hawaiian Kingdom, you are bestowed that nationality, right? That's one way in which Hawaiian nationality is acquired. The next is through parentage, right? So if mom or dad is a Hawaiian national, you are also Hawaiian national. The next was naturalization, right? Those are the three modes in which you can acquire Hawaiian nationality in the 19th century. During the occupation, two of those modes go out the window. The only mode left to acquire Hawaiian nationality is through parentage. So because there's an ongoing occupation, birth from the soil as a qualification to become a Hawaiian national is extinct. It's gone. Sorry, it's not an indicator. And
until the Hawaiian Kingdom is reestablished and the occupation is over, correct? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Well, I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
The next one, because there isn't a government, a government to implement or operationalize, naturalizing citizens, that is gone as well too. So only parentage continues. My dissertation did do a couple of percentage projections. This is actually something that's also based off of Lorenz Gonchor's older work on his dissertation, but I updated it in 2014, so these are really kind of outdated numbers. So all of that in mind, today there's somewhere close to 650,000 Hawaiian nationals that exist in the world today. So 650,000 Hawaiian nationals, Aboriginal and multi-ethnic, that exist in the world today. The majority of those, right, is the Aboriginal population. There's somewhere close to 30 to 50,000 of the 650 make up the multi-ethnic, the non-Aboriginal. So the majority of that 600,000 is the Aboriginal population. However,
can I ask you a question with that real quick in that spot?
I'm gonna say one more thing.
Okay,
the majority, however, aren't living here. And so currently living in Hawaii, Hawaiian nationals, somewhere around, this is just a rough projection, 300,000, 350,000, somewhere within that range.
Oh, that's only our families.
That's just, so you take that number, 350,000, and then there's 1.5 million people that live in Hawaii today, right? So we're talking about an alien group, right, of more than a million.
More than a million
right?
people.
So 1.1 million, quote unquote, aliens, which is another designation under Hawaiian Kingdom law. Aliens had all of the rights of, most of the citizens, with the exclusion of a couple of things, including you couldn't vote. But today, right, just to give you an idea of the situation that we're in, I gave you an example of Barack Obama and Daniel Inouye. You take that and you times that by
1.1 million.
Yeah, there's potentially 1.1 million examples.
Okay, I have a question.
Settlers.
I have a question from people that are listening. Well, actually, several questions, and I really appreciate people's participation in texting questions in, because this is really good. This one comes from Kamuela from Maui, and he made a statement. The law of occupation is there to keep status quo of the occupied state. And he said, I believe the population of Americans was about 2% pre-Hawaiian occupation. What happens to all the Americans when America finally complies with the laws of occupation?
So one of the first things that would need to happen, leading up to post-occupation, deoccupation, is a census. Right? There needs to be a census that classifies, categorizes Hawaiian nationality. There would also more than likely would need to be a nationality act, right? So the reconvened legislature would have to create new rules to ensure that that status quo, as Kamuela had mentioned, is maintained, right? But essentially those two things would need to happen: a census and a nationality act, right?
But that cannot be, it cannot be done until the occupation flips back to the Hawaiian Kingdom, correct?
Yeah, because there isn't an effective government in place right now. So you'd have to reconvene the legislature, and that would be the work of the legislative body. In other places in which the occupation has happened, there is this question what to do with the settlers, and international law does provide protection to settlers, right? In most cases, the settler population were allowed to stay, but they were stripped of the ability to participate in the political process,
and also be subject to when you bring foreigners in, they have to register, correct?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, but that would happen through the census, right? A census would classify and categorize.
So the census, that's kind of what my question was, because nationality, you don't, like from your explanations, you don't have a choice of your nationality. It's based upon, like you said, parentage and all those pieces. So when we're talking about census, like, how do we verify that the census is like accurate? You know what I mean? Because there's my example is I have relatives that don't live in Hawaii and they haven't been here for a long time and they don't necessarily identify with Hawaii. So when they get the census, they might just say, no, I'm an American. You know what I mean? Like, how do we verify that they, even though they want to be American, they're raised as American, they do these American things, legally, according to the definition, they're not. You know what I mean? Yeah. So how do we balance that, I guess, juxtaposition position between, where we have locals in Hawaii that are not Hawaiian nationals that identify with Hawaiian nationals, and then we have Hawaiian nationals living abroad who don't identify with being a Hawaiian national.
Well, I think that because it's 2021, the census would be totally very different from what it was back in the Hawaiian Kingdom days in terms of identifying who's who, because Hawaiians are so spread out around the world that there's going to be Hawaiians that won't even register or submit a census because they don't know any better. So
I have the feeling that the prospect of a deoccupied Hawaii will bring the kind of exposure, will bring the kind of excitement to many of our Kanaka who are in the diaspora and abroad for reasons out of their control. And
is that
that would be the hard work of the Hawaiian legislature. But I think
is that a good or bad thing in your opinion when you have people from? Would that be a good or bad thing to have Kanaka from all over the world come in who have never lived in Hawaii, but now all of a sudden, their entire life they've never lived as Hawaiians, but now they're going to have major influence on the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Yeah, and just in you bringing up that potential conflict, of course could happen, but I'm also on the side of we got to bring the family home essentially, and
sure,
and that's an opportunity to to really kind of reinvest in Hawaii and its people, right? That in my opinion would be the people that need to be here again, and for those genealogies to thrive again in these islands, is an exciting prospect.
Another
but-
another listener just pointed out parentage, and would that be through genealogy? So should people now work on their genealogy so that they can start to gather evidence, especially if they're non-Hawaiian and they believe that their tutus or great-grandparents or non-Hawaiians that became subjects. When should people start to gather this information, or should they already have it?
Yeah, yesterday. They should have did it yesterday. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and not necessarily for the purposes of looking for, what people might think is like gold at the end of the rainbow, that there's, outside of finding your nationality or citizenship status by doing your genealogical review, there's other important things to consider that.
Do you have any places that you might be able to recommend people start looking at, aside from, what's that online, you go
Ancestry.
Yeah, ancestry.com, or are there a place, or family search, or do you have a place where people can turn to?
Just like Wikipedia, those kinds of new sites are a good place to start. They will give you a good jumpstart into that search, and the amount of online repositories that are now available today, not just internationally and nationally, but in Hawaii. There's a tremendous amount of resources out there for that kind of research to take place.
What about if you find your family members in the Kauai petitions, is that automatically being you as a Hawaiian national?
Not necessarily, because there are non-Hawaiian nationals that also sign the Kauai petition.
Yeah.
There are aliens that also sign the Kauai petition, which is I think, to the point I was making, is another good reason to do your genealogy. Not necessarily to go and find out if you're Hawaiian, but if you did have an ancestor that made this place home, that found residence in Hawaii, it's a fascinating journey into who that person was, what side were they on, and there's a bunch of cases. There's a handful of cases out there where you don't necessarily find the pot of gold, so to speak, but you find some pilikia that your ancestor was a part of, and that's important too, because it also shows that there's transformation, right, in genealogy, in different generations.
So, for people that, again, have lived in Hawaii for, let's say, 2 generations, after the overthrow took place, what, aside from filling out the census, what would they need to do in order to stay in Hawaii?
I'm gonna punt that question to the reconvened Hawaiian legislature again, but
well, for now, under Hawaiian Kingdom law, what would have happened?
Well, they could reside here, right, as domiciled aliens, right? That's a term used to refer to a resident who is an alien. They would experience, all the rights and privileges except for voting. They would have continued to live in a progressive society where education and healthcare were, paramount. They would have benefited from all of the Hawaiian Kingdom's other public institutions, right? The Hawaiian Kingdom, 19th century, very similar to other progressive countries in the world today, Finland, Switzerland, right, where these today, they're considered welfare states or welfare societies, right? Where you could go to a quality school without having to pay $30,000 a year. You would pay nothing, right? You could go and get healthcare.
Healthcare. Yeah.
Without paying those same kinds of outrageous costs. So,
Can I ask you a question about the schools that you just said?
Sure.
Like you said, so like commitment schools, that's where I work. And in her will, or her trust that was created in 1883, she states that the school was for Hawaiians, first and foremost for Hawaiians. So in that context, as the resident alien living in Hawaii today, they technically wouldn't be allowed to go to the community schools. But any Hawaiians, no matter, because it's written 1883, is it correct that any Hawaiian national, doesn't matter if they're Aboriginal or not, would still be able to attend that school according to that terminology in that time period?
Sorry, doesn't she say pure or part though? Pure or part
She
Aboriginal?
says finances will be given
Article
to those
13.
of pure or part Aboriginal. So financial aid is provided for those of pure or part, but she doesn't mention. She just says for Hawaiians, and financial assistance will be given to those of pure or part Aboriginal ancestry.
And I would like to think that, that Kamehameha is only one of, a number of educational institutions that were, available in the 19th century. Is similar to the Department of Education. Their administrations, in large part, become hijacked, right? And a different kind of education is taught. But, the kind of options that were available in the 19th century aren't available to today, right? They're not, those options aren't available today, which is a little disturbing to think about, right? That the kind of preferences that Hawaiians have today when it comes to education are dwarfed today, from the 19th century. In the 19th century, you had, it wasn't just the Department of Education, but you had, right, Iolani, which is now a private school today. Midpac used to be Kauai Ha'o Seminary, another private school today. Punahou was a college. Lahaina Luna is in 1831. St. Andrew's Priory, St. Louis, right, is another one. These are, when you look at the commitment and dedication that the government dedicated to education in the 19th century, they were wanting to create an informed citizenry, right? They wanted an informed body politic that could vote and participate in a robust democratic society. When you're talking about the United States today, right, they're trying to do just the opposite, right? Dumb us down, make us sick, right, and make it almost impossible to continue to live here, right? And that's not just the conditions of education and society, in Hawaii. That's across the whole entire U.S. empire, across the, all the American states.
I'd like to take it back to previous question that I asked, and I didn't ask it clearly, but in the people that have lived here for, let's say, 2 generations, and if they want to stay here, would they need to go through the Department of Immigration and register through the department and go through that formality of an alien, of becoming registered alien?
Yeah, that's something that the legislative body would have to come up with, a path for aliens to acquire Hawaiian citizenship, Hawaiian nationality.
The rhetoric going on is that, if the Hawaiian Kingdom come back, will I be kicked out of Hawaii? I hear that a lot, especially from non-Hawaiians.
I just off I would say no, you're not getting kicked out of Hawaii. There are, and that's what I had mentioned earlier, is there are international legal guidelines and principles that provide guidance in dealing with a settler population under occupation.
Okay.
Right, and so there are a number of other incidents, right, or cases around the world in which in where deoccupation takes place, a new reconvened governing body comes in. They then, provide an updated account of how to define or understand citizenship, considering 130 years of occupation, right? But those kinds of questions, are hard to entertain. Those hypotheticals are hard to entertain without having a baseline, which is your census, right? Your census would more than likely direct a reconvened legislature on how to handle this situation of Hawaiian nationality, because you're talking about, such a large settler population, 1.1, 1.2 million, right? But yeah, that, those kinds of questions, I apologize, but I can only tell you to wait until that legislature is reconvened.
Okay, I'm waiting. We're waiting. We're waiting.
We're waiting.
Okay, I have another question, and Kamuela is really active tonight from Maui. So Kamuela, I really appreciate your questions coming in. His question is, aliens, will they be able to purchase and own land in the Hawaiian Kingdom? And I'm not sure if this is, within your purview to be able to answer that. And then a second question from Liz and Charlie Ahui. They said, how about home and property ownership?
Yeah, these are questions that are difficult for me to.
Well, maybe we can see
to answer, but the Hawaiian Kingdom, throughout its history, did entertain this question, right, about foreigners owning land. In the 19th century, when land wasn't a scarcity as it is now, right? Today there's 1.5 million people spread across 4 million acres. Not really for the entire the major islands consist of about 4 million acres. Land is a scarcity. 19th century, it wasn't. They allowed aliens, foreigners, to purchase land, in part because there is an abundance, but also because it was a way to generate revenue, right?
And primarily in the purchase of the lands, the lands had to be fee simple in order for them to purchase it. Sure.
And then but there's different kinds of land ownership, right? But my point is, it's dependent upon the circumstances. Those kinds of questions, has to take in consideration that Hawaiians have been dispossessed for land for 130 years, right? So is it a good idea to allow foreigners to purchase land? Even a country like Canada, today, is putting a halt on foreigners from buying land within their country,
Right.
for like 2 years or something.
And New Zealand.
Yeah. So again, right, those are the kinds of, that legislative body is going to have to entertain or take into consideration what the current status is of the national population.
So the big takeaway really is we need to have an educated group of people who can then become the new legislative body before some of these decisions are actually made. Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the reasons why we do Kanaka Express, is to do the awareness and also to get people prepared so that if there are those out there that want to be involved, they need to get the expertise and not necessarily be told, by someone, this is what you need to do. And all these land questions that are coming up, save those land questions, because in 2 weeks I'm going to have Donovan present on this, and he'll be able to explain and answer all these land questions that we have, so that we can really face to our expert here tonight in regards to the the nationality status and the meaning of that and what needs to be done, on that. So those of you who are asking questions, including Hawaiian Homes issues, save that for 2 weeks down the road, because Donovan President is going to be like that. So let's get back to our expert right here, because this is the guy. This is the guy that we really want to know about how to navigate. Who is Hawaiian Kingdom National, who is so forth and so on. So Tilly, I know you have an awesome question that you want to ask.
Are we okay that we're 10 minutes over?
Sure.
Okay. I think just for me, I'm just thinking about this whole concept of nationality and and how that plays a role. I just think that in the time period that we're at, that we're such in a prime position, like you said, it's exciting. And the fact that there are so many people who are not Hawaiian nationals but love this aina and love our people, have become a part of us, and like they're on our side. And the opposite is also true. There's lots of Hawaiians that want to be, or sorry, not the opposite, but there's lots of Kanaka and Hawaiians that live away that want to come home. So I guess my main question is the military included in that alien count? And if they are, would they be required to leave according to the laws of occupation?
Yes. No, the military is not included in that count. So that number would be higher. But yeah, I mean, the military, under the laws of occupation, would also have to oversee that transition. They would be a part of that process of restoring the government, but also the legislature.
So
these are also, these are also, very there are other examples in the world in which, when these kinds of transitions have taken place, right, the military will favor a particular group of transitions, right, or a particular government per se. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, that's how it would play out. With regard to U.S. military staying in Hawaii post-occupation, that would be dependent upon revised treaty negotiations that the Hawaiian Kingdom government would have to have with the United States, right? The occupation doesn't mean that the Hawaiian Kingdom gets rid of the American Empire forever. It means that the terms of their grip on Hawaii would have to be renegotiated. Does that mean that the U.S. military is allowed to stay? Well, you'd have to look at their track record. That legislative body would have to do the research to come up with a jurisdiction. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, that's 300,000 people.
The military gotta get out.
So that's instant. The new Hawaiian homes is, all those military-based homes that are open to Kanaka and Hawaiian nationals. I mean, we can rebuild the nation, and boom, just like that.
Well, yeah, they got to get out. Think about Red Hill. Think about Puakula. Think about Makua Valley, and think about Kaho'olawe. They got to get out.
Absolutely.
Okay. We've come to the end of our broadcast, and I really appreciate you joining us, Willy. So, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with everyone before you leave?
No, just mahalo to Kanaka Express, Kale, Keli'i. I've been on a couple of times before. So, feel very honored to be asked to jump on. And yeah, this is a great dialogue, great discussion. And, a lot of the transformation takes place in these kinds of venues. So thank you for doing the work that you are doing, and for the commitment that you've shown over the years to make sure Kanaka Express goes onward. So mahalo. And thank you to all the listeners. Awesome questions. Great discussion.
Yeah, and final point from one of our listeners: nationality, military, live away. Part of that. So.
But that's a little complex, because there's some of our family members that are. Yep. That are in there right now, right? So they gotta have a way home too.
Then they can convert over to the Hawaiian Kingdom National Guard.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, hang on for a few minutes. We'll get together later, but don't leave, Willy.
Okay.
So just hang on. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and like I said, in the coming weeks, 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have Donovan Preza that will be joining us. And next week, I really encourage all of you to join us, because we're going to have Dr. Keanu Sai and Hawaii Kingdom Attorney General on, and we're going to be discussing the latest updates in the federal court case that was filed against the United States and against Sweden. And this is going to be next week, Tuesday. So we're going to have the broadcast, and we're going to extend it for 2 hours next week, Tuesday, because there's so much information on there. And again, I'd like to thank my co-host. Where did my co-host go? He should still be on there. I'd like to thank Kelly for joining us. Kelly, any final thoughts on your...
I think final thoughts for tonight is just everybody start doing your genealogy if you didn't already do it. Get on with that and share that mokoha with your ohana members and your keiki and stuff like that, because that 1893 line that Dr. Willy Kauai is talking about is getting farther and farther away from them. So if you can start being those torches of your ohana and just being ready for when the huli and getting ready for when it comes, so that you know the truth and you're an educated part of the educated body of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So yeah, ready, set, go. Challenge is on.
Okay, you guys have your homework. Do your genealogy. Mahalo for joining us, and mahalo for joining us here on Kanaka Express. And I hope to see all of you, and let everybody know we're going to be doing this next week with Dr. Sai and Dexter Kayama, and the following week with Donovan Preza, and we're going to be doing this every Tuesday with great guests. So mahalo for joining us, and aloha.
Pono o Hawaii uama ke o ka aina I ka pono